So good afternoon. It's almost lunchtime, and my name's ERIN Haynes, and I'm a member of the ISEE Ethics and Philosophy Committee. So we have several of these sessions, maybe 5 or 6 throughout the conference, where we end on an ethical, philosophical discussion, even in these large rooms where everyone is scattered about, to think about the talks that we've just heard. And we do have some prompts to engage the conversation. Is there a next slide too, Bud? Oh, this one. Wonderful. So here is like just a general outline of these conversations. We want to engage in a conversation with everyone who's here to promote a greater dialogue and ethical transparency about topics. So we have some guidelines for bioethics and also from public health and environmental epidemiology. So I'd rather spend more time on the conversations. All right, so this is the background mostly that we heard today. I kind of wanted to do a brief summary. There were so many different talks. We had otter fur and human biomonitor sampling and wearing face masks and modeling. Very unique spread of topics. But I wanted to think of how can we model chemical exposures in populations, and these can provide very powerful tools that can be very informative for communities residing near mercury, let's say, or generating novel hypotheses. Yet there are several ethical issues. So there are a few that I brainstormed. There's another page to these, but maybe if we just hit a couple of these. So this is a dialogue for the audience. So we'll discuss the first one first. How is the location of human participant data shared, either in visualization tools or with other researchers? If you'd rather talk about another one, we can do that too. We can make this very flexible.
I can start
There's
out.
2 microphones out,
Yeah.
and also with...
So I can start out. Because I've been thinking about this issue of sharing data, across academic institutions or, other entities that are interested in doing, either similar analyses or just, reproducibility, which I think is really important in science. I think it's a basic tenet of science. And we've heard all about, science transparency and, issues around that a lot in the news, and of course motivated by a lot of politics, which as scientists, I don't think we like to get into too much. At least I don't. But anyway, but I think there is, an issue, and someone brought this up. I mean, of course we can censor data, we can censor individuals, but when we're really trying to get at spatial distributions, we often have, locations
Right.
of people's homes. So, I mean, that is a big issue. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear what other people have to say. Is it, does that mean then that we can't share data,
Right.
and that there's a big issue with sharing data? Or is there a way that, I don't know, that we can censor data so that we're not, but, we don't know where someone lives. It's like, so anyway.
Exactly. Do you have another comment?
Yeah, I was just going to add, so my supervisor, Lori Chan, he heads the First Nation Food, Nutrition, and Environment Study. So we go into communities and do a household survey, so we have a lot of personal information, a lot of culturally sensitive information. And so this has been done for almost 100 First Nation communities living on reserve across Canada. And so we have a lot of conversations around how do we keep the confidentiality of these communities, and especially when we're creating maps and sharing our results. And so one of the ways that we do it is we actually end up aggregating our data. So it was based on an ecozone model. And so we have at least 2 communities, and in each community there's roughly 1,000 participants. And so it's kind of like we aggregate the data and aggregate the data. But the data does go back to the individual community, and so if the community does want to share their data with a researcher, they have every right to do that, but they also have the right to say, no, we don't want this information released. And so that's kind of how we kind of deal with that, especially when it comes to mapping and visualizations, because everybody loves maps, but they can reveal a lot of identifying information sometimes.
Yeah. Excellent. Sonia.
So I thought there was, I was thinking about the comment that Sonia made and the last comment as well, that, so I know, so there's one aspect is just communicating study information, community information to the community. So, but then there's been, I know, some research or some methods to look at how you can provide the same information for research purposes that's more anonymized, as in creating, for example, synthetic populations where it basically has the same characteristics as your actual population, but then, you know, it doesn't have any of the personal information. And I don't know very much about it, but I know that it's sort of an interesting possibility as well.
Interesting. I've not heard of a synthetic population.
I don't think it's very common.
I've not heard of that
But
one.
yeah.
Has anyone else dealt with geospatial modeling, mapping, individual results? I know you can get down to maybe a census tract and do an aggregate for a census tract, something smaller than a county or a regional location. But when you're dealing with rural, let's say rural populations, maybe you only have a few people in an area.
Yeah, aggregating can get
Aggregating.
tricky.
And then we haven't discussed informed consent. How should that be written when you are collecting information that you may be mapping in the future? Will they know that their location could be on a map or displayed for all humanity to see on there?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have informed consent. And I like the idea that, you know, you can say no if,
Right.
you know, and make that clear as an option.
Right. And for researchers to think ahead of how they may use data and to include it on informed consent, because sometimes it's not just an afterthought. Oh, we saw this at a meeting, we could do this.
Yeah.
But do the participants know?
And the other issue, I think, as Miranda said, is when you're communicating the results back to a community, I think it's really important to think about how to best communicate it. I think as
Yes.
scientists, you know, we use a lot of technical language and we don't even realize it because it's part of our nature. And so really trying to translate results so that they are accessible to the communities that you're working in, I think is always challenging.
Absolutely. Data report back, data disclosure is a huge area and field that we're still, I think, grappling with. We could actually have a whole workshop on data disclosure. Oh, is there? Okay, great. The sun is in my
It
eye.
just seems like in statistical data, when there's a cell that has less than 5, you know, that data is either withheld or indicated that we have, you know, that's too small to publish. And it seems like on maps, if you could somehow, I mean, in tiny areas where it's clear you could really tell one house from another, that, you know, it would be maybe good to kind of just have some indicator on these maps that say cell numbers were too small, but there are 5 houses in this area, you know. And I think that might be a safe way. I mean, that's kind of like a norm that's been established already in a way with data.
That's true. It's a very good point. So one of the final questions on this slide, anyway, is the role of the community as a whole in determining how the community could be involved or how it's represented. I've only looked at individual consent. We consent individuals to participate, and that's great. Everyone has their own identity and their own desire to be or not be a part of a study. But communities, and maybe the tribal communities are a better example of how they come together as a a tribal unit to say whether or not they want their community approached. But I was wondering if anyone, or if we could discuss just how communities could be approached. You talk with the leadership, mayors, et cetera. Maybe the role of a community advisory board for an exposure research study, because many times if you find something in a community of high levels, it could result in a stigma on that community. Maybe property values could go down. So should there be a community advisory board of representatives to discuss how that data should be shared and how the research moves forward?
Involved in a study in South Africa, and which I know isn't necessarily relevant to the developed world, but it was very sensitive. People were really sensitive about us doing the study on DDE and birth weight, and it was a major deal recruiting people, and there were all sorts of issues that because people weren't familiar with research in this area at all. And we had a community advisory board of kind of leaders in the community, in this African community, and it was really, really useful. And there were things that came up we would have never imagined, and that we should be careful about. So I think even in the culturally familiar context, it really makes sense to have that kind of a board.
I agree. Are you running for a comment, Greg?
I know we're getting close to the award ceremony, so I don't want to hold that up. One thing I want to caution people about is I dislike sometimes the focus on community leaders. Those are already identified leaders, and while they may be helpful, I think it is, from past research experience, actually very important to give many members of the community an opportunity to become aware of research and join a community engaged research project as part of a group, because identified leaders may not be the people affected.
Yep.
And so you want to have people who are affected by your research also present. So what we did was actually hold community meetings first and start formation of a research advisory board in our communities, and then give people continued ability to join.
Great.
So rather than so I just wanted to throw that out there because I
Perfect.
think it is kind of an important point that I don't always hear.
Excellent. I'm glad you did. Thank you. So we are running close to the awards. So Sonia, if we can wrap up, we want to really sincerely thank the speakers for their excellent talks this afternoon and for your contribution in this session. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.